parts of the bodies all over the house, in places you wouldn't think.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Deviance, a true crime podcast. My name is Devin, and before we jump into this mini episode, I just have a few things I want to clear up about the last episode, which was Amanda Knox and the murder of Meredith Kircher. I was getting some tweets about that episode saying, well, a lot of things, so I just wanted to clear some things up really quick. First of all, I just want to make it very clear that I don't think Amanda is innocent, and I never said that I did. I just don't want to make up anyone's minds for them. So I sat on the fence a little bit, and I also don't want to get sued. I also can't say for sure that she's guilty because I don't know. There are people out there who are very passionate about the Meredith Kircher case, and rightfully so. I understand. It's a very complicated case, and they spend a lot of their time researching it and studying every piece of evidence, and they know a lot more about it than I do. And I never claimed to be an expert on that case. And again, it's incredibly complex and detailed, and a lot of the evidence and reports are in languages or in a language that I don't speak. I don't speak Italian. So I just read the translations, and I read the bad translations apparently. But again, I'm not perfect, so if I did get some facts wrong, I do sincerely apologize. And that is why I encouraged people at the end to do their own research, because you should always do your own research when presented with new information. You should never just blindly believe anyone, even if it's me. But yeah, I just wanted to clear some of that up before we get into this week's episode, which is who put Bella in the Wych Elm. So without further ado, let's just get into it. So let's travel back in time quite a bit to April 18th, 1943, before literally anyone that I personally know on Earth was alive. 4 local boys named Robert Hart, Thomas Willits, Bob Farmer, and Fred Payne, who were apparently teenagers when this happened. But when I first heard this, I thought they were really young boys from the way that everyone describes them. But they were out in the woods poaching or bird nesting in Hagley Wood near Wychbury Hill in Worcestershire, England, which, good God, English names for things like towns and they just sound like gibberish. I'm sorry, if you're British and you're listening to this, or English, I don't know the difference. If you're English and listening to this, all of your towns and names for things sound so weird to me as an American. Like, they all sound fake. It's just like, oh, I went to Hagley Wood near Wychbury Hill in Worcestershire, England. Like, what? That doesn't sound real. All those places sound fake. But anyway, while these boys were out searching for bird nests to destroy, which is what poaching is, by the way, the boys came across a large wych elm, which is this cool-ass tree that kind of looks like the big tree in Harry Potter that, like, murders people. It's great. But anyway, upon seeing the tree, the boys thought to themselves that, hey, this would be a good place for birds to nest, because it's like cozy and comforting. So let's destroy their eggs, because all 1940s boys were kind of psychopathic, apparently. So one of the boys, Bob Farmer, attempted to climb the tree to investigate and see if he could find any birds' nests. And as he climbed, he happened to glance down into the hollow trunk of the tree and saw a skull. And at first he thought it was an animal skull, but after looking a little closer and seeing like human hair and teeth still attached to it, he realized that he had just found a human skull. Fun. But because the boys were all on the land illegally, they decided they didn't want to tell anyone what they found because they didn't want to get in trouble for trespassing and also for poaching, because I guess that was also illegal even though it was the 40s. So Bob put the skull back where he found it, because apparently he grabbed it and took it out of the trunk, which is so gross. But then all 4 boys went home without mentioning their discovery to anybody. But it wasn't until the youngest of the boys, Thomas, started feeling guilty about not telling someone what they found that he ended up telling his parents, and who then obviously called the police, because that's what you're supposed to do when you find a dead body in the woods. So when the cops went to investigate the tree, They found not just a skull, but almost an entire human skeleton. The skeleton had shoes and clothing and a gold mock wedding ring. And so whoever this was apparently married, or was at least pretending to be, because it was a mock wedding ring, apparently. But so in order to potentially find out who this was, the investigators on the scene started to look at the skull, which actually had some pretty valuable information on it. It had some tufts of hair still attached to it, and it had teeth that were still attached, which had a clear dental pattern, which were later referred to as, quote, irregular teeth by the forensic examiners, which basically just means that whoever it was had some, like, fucked up, gnarly ass teeth, basically. But while inspecting the skeleton for clues, they realized that the skeleton was, like, missing a hand. Just missing a hand. So they were like, where is that? We should find that. So they searched the woods and actually found the hand a little bit away from the tree, but the hand bones had been scattered around like some super morbid confetti at the Grim Reaper's retirement party or something. But anyway, they took the body out of the tree and handed it off to some forensic experts who determined that the skeleton belonged to a female who had been dead for at least 18 months. And they placed her time of death either in or around October of 1941. And they were also able to determine that the victim was around 35 years old. She had, quote, mousy colored hair, which is rude. What does that even mean? Like grayish brown? What color are mice? Mice are all colors. What a dumb Anyway, and she was 5 feet tall and had given birth at least once in the past, and again, had irregular teeth. Also, when they found her, she had a piece of taffeta stuffed in her mouth, which is apparently a type of fabric. I had to look it up because it kind of sound like some stupid British word for candy or something, even though it's like normally really difficult to determine the cause of death with just a skeleton, unless it was something obvious like blunt force trauma. Because of the taffeta was there, they were able to determine that she had probably died of suffocation. Because they couldn't really find any other injuries. I mean, it was just a skeleton. But, like, if someone was stabbed to death, generally, maybe you can see, like, tiny little stab things. Like little stab nicks in the bones on the skeleton. Like, if they actually hit bone. Sometimes not. Sometimes you can. I don't know. It all really depends. Again, it's really hard to tell how someone died when you just have their skeleton. But because she had that thing in her throat, they were like, oh, yeah, that's probably what it was. So, following this horrific discovery in the woods, Worcestershire police, also, if you are from England, or you know someone from England and you can ask them this question, how do you pronounce Worcestershire? Am I saying it right? Do you say it differently there? I don't know. Let me know. Tweet at me, at Deviance Podcast. But, the Worcestershire police contacted all of the dentists in the area, hoping that because she had weird-ass teeth, one of them would be able to recognize her. And they were also able to determine that she had had dental work done within a year of her death. So obviously their first thought was like, yeah, let's see if any dentists know who she is, because she has weird teeth that were worked on recently. So the police also searched through like piles and piles of missing persons reports to see if any of them matched the description of this woman they found. But somehow neither of these things turned up any leads at all. Not the dentists and not any of the missing persons reports. And the investigation then started to turn towards the things that were found at the scene. So, for example, the investigators were able to track down where her shoes came from, and they were able to actually find the owners of all but 6 pairs. But none of it mattered because it didn't lead to anything either. Like everything that they tried ended up being nothing. Like it led to nothing. So the fact that the police kept coming up with nothing made the case start to go cold pretty quickly. Plus more and more people started to go missing because of the war. I mean, it was World War II, so the public and the police kind of forgot about the woman because there were more important things going on, really. Which sounds horrible, but like it was the war. Like there were horrible things and more important things going on. And she remained forgotten about for a little while. Then about 6 months after her body was found, mysterious graffiti started to pop up in the area. The first message, which was written in chalk on the side of a house, read, who put Lubella down the Wych Elm. This was the first time that any name had been connected to the woman they found, so everyone started referring to her as Bella. And over the next few months, similar messages appeared, all seemingly written by the same person. But before you ask, no, I don't think it was Banksy. And after a while, the messages got simplified down to just who put Bella in the Wych Elm. And even though the graffiti obviously implied that someone knew who killed Bella, the appeals by the police to find the artist also led to nothing. Like, no one was actively trying to figure out who this girl was. It was really fucked up, honestly. Then, in the late 40s, new messages started to appear asking the same question, who put Bella in the Wych Elm? And people started to wonder, like, is this a clue or is this just someone fucking with us? And the combination of the mysterious messages and the lack of any identity outside of a potentially fake name for the victim prompted some very interesting theories. So let's get into some of the theories now. Let's see who people think she was. One theory that surfaced pretty early on in the investigation, which is still one of the most popular theories to this day, was that Bella could have been the victim of some sort of black magic ritual. According to an anthropologist named Margaret Murray, the fact that Bella's hand was severed from her arm and the bones were scattered around the forest held a lot of similarities to an occult ceremony known as the Hand of Glory. She also concluded that the murder was somehow connected to another case that potentially involved witchcraft, the murder of Charles Walton. Also, apparently the plant belladonna, which is also known as deadly nightshade, like from The Nightmare Before Christmas, and witch hazel are both widely associated with the occult, and apparently so is Hagley Woods, where Bella was found. The fact that Bella was shoved inside of a tree rather than being buried is also apparently indicative of a ritualistic murder, but despite all of these connections, investigators working on the case dismissed the theory pretty much immediately, claiming that the bones from Bella's hand had simply been scattered around by animals and that it had nothing to do with witches, and everyone should calm down with all the witch and Satan shit, okay? But yeah, that theory, I mean, there's a lot of information about the witch theory specifically if you really want to look into it. But let's go on to the spy theory. This actually this one's weird. There are several different theories involving a spy theory for Bella, which we'll get into it. So during World War II, which is when Bella was missing or died or whatever, there were a lot of German spies captured in the UK, and as a result, in 1953, the case of Bella and the Wych Elm attracted a new line of inquiry: war espionage. Jesus, I could barely get that out. The Wolverhampton Express and Star, which has to be some sort of British newspaper or something like that. Just absolutely ridiculous. Again, everything sounds fake. Wolverhampton Express and Star? That's not even real. But they received a letter from somebody who called herself Anna, and she claimed to have information on who Bella was. And again, this is 12 years after her body was found and after this case even was a thing that anyone talked about. But she was interviewed by a journalist named Wilfred Byford Jones. Jesus. Anna was later identified as Una Mossop. Again, I'm bad at pronouncing names that aren't American. I apologize. But she claimed that her husband, Jack, had actually witnessed Bella's death. Jack had worked at a local munitions factory in the early 40s and had apparently come into some money after meeting a mysterious Dutchman named Van Ralt. Jack apparently admitted to Una that Van Ralt was a Nazi agent and that he was being paid to give Van Ralt information. So one day, the story goes like this. One day, Jack met Van Ralt at a pub close to Hagley Wood, and where Van Ralt was arguing with a Dutch woman. He ordered Jack to drive them both out to the Clent Hills, but the argument had grown extremely violent, and Van Ralt apparently strangled the woman in the car. And because he was scared shitless that he was also going to be murdered, Jack helped carry the body into nearby Hagley Wood, where two men buried her body. They put her body in the hollow of the Wych Elm tree. And Una's husband, Jack, was apparently so traumatized by the brutal murder of Bella that he had a nervous breakdown and was just tormented by these horrific visions of a woman's skull in a tree, and had these horrific nightmares of like a woman staring at him from inside of a tree. And he was institutionalized in 1941 and apparently died later that year in St. George's Hospital. So years after Bella's body was discovered, some declassified files actually added an entirely different series of events, completely unrelated to the first spy theory that I just told you, that at first actually did support this whole theory. Apparently, the files revealed information about a German spy named Joseph Jacobs, who was arrested after breaking his ankle while parachuting into Cambridgeshire in 1941. Apparently, after Jacobs was arrested, a photograph of the German actress Clara Barla, sorry if I butchered that, was found in his pocket. And Jacobs told his interrogators that Clara was actually his lover, and that the Third Reich had recruited her as a spy. He also claimed that Clara had parachuted into the West Midlands in 1941 and disappeared. And the West Midlands, if you don't know, that's where Hagley Woods is. That's like where, or it was back in the day, that's where Bella was found, basically. Unfortunately, Jacobs was never able to shed any more light on Clara's fate, considering he was executed by firing squad in August of 1941. But it is pretty certain that Clara couldn't have been Bella, just for the simple reason that Clara was tall. She was like 5'10", whereas Bella was, like I said before, only 5 foot. It was also discovered in 2016 that Clara had died in a Berlin hospital in 1942. So it's just not true. But that was a theory for a really long time, up until about 3 years ago. So getting away from the spy theory for a second here, in August of 2014, BBC Radio broadcast a program that suggested that Bella was actually a prostitute who worked the streets around Hagley Road, and that she was just, murdered by some guy, who knows who. And according to police files, Bella had disappeared in 1941, which would fit the timeline of the events. But also, some of the locals pointed out the fact that gypsies often camped out in the vicinity of Hagley Woods during the time Bella would have gone missing, and that she could have possibly been part of that community and murdered by one of her own. But with no concrete evidence to support these theories, they all ultimately led to nowhere, just like the rest of them. But the most probable hypothesis that I could find about this, that I believe the most, is that Bella was just a homeless woman with no loved ones to report her missing, and just no one cared that she was gone. And it's the saddest and least interesting theory, but it's honestly the most realistic and most probable one, unfortunately. And this case actually stayed cold for around 75 years until 2017, when forensic anthropologist Caroline Wilkinson was approached by father-son authors Alex and Pete Merrill to see if she might be able to create a digital reconstruction of the Bella's face using photographs of her skull. Wilkinson agreed, and along with her colleagues at the Face Lab of Liverpool John Moores University, which is quite a mouthful, she was able to extrapolate facial features based on the pictures of the skull. And they could apparently only use these old-ass 1940s photographs of the skull because the real skull somehow got lost by authorities. I mean, I get it. They originally took it into custody. They arrested the skull in 1941, and it wasn't until 2017 when they were like, hey, could you, try to make a face out of this? So I get it. It was a long time between when they found it and when they needed it again. But I will post a photo of the digital facial reconstruction on Instagram, which is at Deviance Podcast, if you want to see it, along with a picture of the Wych Elm and some other things we mentioned before here. But as of right now, in 2019, there are still no leads as to who this woman was. And I know I've been calling her Bella this whole time, but that could potentially, not even be her name. We don't know anything about this woman at all. And like all we know is that she had shoes, clothes, and a fake wedding ring, which the fake wedding ring also, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, does kind of go along with the spy theory. Like maybe she was trying to blend in and like was wearing a wedding ring, or she was trying to appear like she was married when she actually wasn't. She was trying to like change her identity, you know? Also, just want to point out, if there aren't any dental records, because they didn't find any dental records of hers in England at all, right? But she had recently had dental work done. Doesn't that just kind of show that she wasn't English? Like she was from somewhere else? Like she had to have been an immigrant or a foreigner of some kind, you know what I mean? So it was just weird to me that they never really looked into that. They were just like, oh, well, she couldn't find her teeth records in England, so she just doesn't exist. I don't know. It's just really weird. But regardless of all of that, if there's anything to take from the story, I think it's don't live a life of such isolation and social seclusion that when you go missing, no one reports that you're even gone. And when they pull your decomposing skeleton out of a tree, you're never identified and your case goes cold because no one knows who you are, even 75 years later. Like, dude, make good friends. Keep in touch with your family if they're still around. Don't be a Nazi spy, and don't piss off any witches or gypsies because they will sacrifice you and stuff your body in a scary tree. Yeah, guys, that's all I have for you today. I know this was a really short episode, but again, this is an unsolved mystery. And it's one that's really interesting to me, so I thought I would share it with you guys. But that's all I have for you today. So if you liked what you heard, please consider following me on Twitter at Deviance Podcast, on Instagram at Deviance Podcast, and I also have a Facebook page called Deviance, a true crime podcast. But yeah, thank you so much for listening, and as always, stay safe out there. Bye.